Focus and staying focused. All right, let me try this again and see if I can get through this without using F slur and R slur within at least the first few minutes. It's very challenging. Okay, so I haven't, when I saw this picture, I thought it was a joke. When I saw the rest of the pictures, I thought it was like some kind of like Daily Stormer level joke, something just like off the wall. It turns out, no, they're actually making a movie. But before I get into that, the Sienkiewicz thing, they're doing this, they're trolling the Amazon release, which is friggin' hysterical because it's so accurate. I wasn't giving a whole lot of thought to this because this is a movie, like there's movies that come out, Charlie's Angels, Ghostbuster, the X-Men, was the Terminator movie. There's a bunch of these movies that come out, like when the Terminator came out and Charlie's Angels came out, it's a bunch of, vaguely fuzz bumper looking women, and you look at that and there's no part of you that is interested in seeing that in any capacity. Hey, I got free tickets, you want to go see it and we'll review it and have a laugh after it? Not really. Maybe if there's some pharmacological enhancements, like can we drink in the theater? Well, maybe if you brought like a little whiskey bottle or something, you could. I mean, it would be tough. So there's movies that you don't even want to watch, even as a cringe Olympics, because they're not so bad they're good. They're just painfully stupid to sit through, or Birds of Prey type of thing. It's like, you had this budget and you were almost there, but you just decided to F yourselves in the A on camera for 90 minutes. Like nobody enjoyed it. People watching didn't enjoy it. And the thing is, it was almost, that's what trips me out about a lot of these movies, is that they were almost there. Anyway, so I haven't got too excited about Lord of the Rings because I saw these images come out. I'm like, it's not, you just hate brown people. Clearly that's not the case. It's not Lord of the Rings. You're calling it one thing. It's like, I hate to use this example. I'd love to use this example of the adults leaving the buildings. Like when you call a man a woman, well then, like, the rules are off the table. Anything goes. You can call anything. So when you see this, they go, oh, we updated Lord of the Rings. But that's not the thing. That's not the thing itself. Lord of the Rings has a meaning. It's a guy who wrote a bunch of books. 5, at least, really well-known ones that mean they make up the totality of the universe of Lord of the Rings. It's already a complete story in and of itself. You might be able to tell some stories within the Lord of the Rings, or if you want to extrapolate, hey, go for it. But the idea is maintain the artistic vision. When they made the movies 20-odd years ago, they got together and said, listen, we are going to be as close to the artistic energy of the original film as possible. We're going to respect that. And they did, and those movies were hugely successful. My point is, I think this is going to be like one of the biggest film bombs in history. And it's on, I guess, Amazon. Now, this is like assessing financial losses is going to be a little bit different. It's like this literally could be a $400 million loss. Like they're going to put $1 billion into it. Say they got some money, got some new subs out of it, but they lost like over $500 million. They can kind of amortize those sort of losses in a way that is different when it's a standalone movie as opposed to being Netflix or one of these streaming services, because it's not so much about having individual hit movies, it's about having a deep bench. You walk into Blockbuster, circa 1990, and there's all these VHS tapes up against the wall. Now, realistically, 5% of those are going to be awesome films, but it's to have this appearance of selection. So when Amazon Prime is trying to convince you to pay $13 a month instead of Netflix, instead of HBO Max, they go, yeah, we got Lord of the Rings. And in the back of your mind thinking, yeah, I'm not going to watch Lord of the Rings. It looks horrible. It kind of doesn't matter because it's just something to put on the shelf that kind of entices people. So figuring out the balance sheet for a business like this is a little bit more tricky. And it's like it could be the biggest bomb in history and literally lose them $500 million based on the property alone, still without hurting the company because the company is so big and they're using it. I don't know. It's like the money they're putting into this, like the left looks at this and they don't like what they see. And some of them are coming out and they're trying to get behind it, trying to support it, but I'm not hearing even fake support from the left. because there's a lot of people on the left or the right and in the middle. If you're a Lord of the Ring fans, you're not behind this. So that's why this has very little support, because even you can be almost as left-wing as you want, but when you see evil cannot create, when you see this, like there are black fans of Lord of the Rings who look at this and go, oh, yeah, this isn't Lord of the Rings. It might be good and it might be set in that same kind of universe, but you shouldn't have called it Lord of the Rings. Like, they have to. They have no choice. They can't just make an unknown property when they're not going to do that. I mean, there's a lot of cultural Marxism that goes into this too, in the humiliation ritual. But there's, like on Twitter, there's a bunch of people from all across different platforms, different parts of the world, who are looking at this and go, yeah, but this isn't Lord of the Rings. It doesn't have anything. I mean, you could put a Chinese woman. It's like, oh, you see this woman, you hate her because she's some sort of African lady. You put a Chinese lady, it's like, oh, you must hate her because she's Chinese. You could put something else that's obviously, or say, I don't know, some Russian chick with a Russian accent. It was like, well, that wasn't in Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings was distinctly English and European. It's like it is complete in and of itself. You can't do this to Lord of the Rings and still call it Lord of the Rings. It's like, they're going to do it anyway. Yeah, and they're probably going to lose $500 million. This is going to be a huge people on Twitter saying like this is going to be the perfect storm of financial loss for movies. Okay, I saw this image. I assume this was a joke also. No, apparently not. It's all real. If you want to watch the clip on Amazon, watch it with the sound off and watch how quick the cuts are. They don't want your eye to settle on any one scene. It's just a bunch of quick cuts to kind of get you excited that there's action. It's set in the Lord of the Ring universe. I think this thing is going to tank. And I know, like, people on the right say that about properties, and it doesn't always turn out that way. They said that about the Ms. Marvel, or Captain Marvel, the Brie Larson movie that came out a few years ago. Well, I mean, that was a little different because it was nestled in between the two biggest films in history, like both just huge anticipated films. And I mean, literally the two biggest films in history. That was a little bit different. This has a huge name recognition, but then you see an image like this, and like, is this a joke? What do you mean? How dare you criticize a black woman? I'm not. I'm criticizing you for making a movie that doesn't make sense. She's not, the book's already written. You can't add to the story. This is not, and they use POCs as shields, because they know that people are hesitant to criticize them. That might be true. There are left-wing people on Twitter who will not come out and say, yeah, this isn't Lord of the Rings, because it's just not worth the sociological pressure to go against that. But that doesn't mean they're going to buy a subscription to Amazon. When you live in an environment where it's so easy to go sailing the high seas, you have to make people want to kind of respect your company enough to there's a lot of ways to support people financially, and there's a lot of ways to steal from them digitally. You have to make people kind of want to get behind this project and support it financially. And this is not going to happen because this is not Lord of the Rings. You're just taking this corpus of something and you're trying to rework it. Anyway, so Bill Sienkiewicz, I don't know. Some idiot, some SJW idiot. And welcome to comicsgate, Bill. He, how do you think comicsgate got started? Oh, you're a bunch of women haters. Yeah, no, not really. I think people are kind of like women, or at least don't have any special issue with women. He did this interview on Facebook that Facebook took down because it was too just filled with hatred. He felt like a kind of guy who was reading, doing a book report for a book he hadn't read. He's talking about CG and saying, like, everyone in CG is misogynist. And I think the reason he was saying it is because Myers used to critique comic books. I guess he still does, but this was back in the days when he was a little bit spicier. Written by women SJWs, and he obviously was critiquing the SJW aspect of the propaganda. It didn't matter that it was a woman writing it. Mark Wade's a woman. Mark Wade's a man, and people criticize him. It's like, is it misandry? Because Mark Wade's, you're only criticizing him because he's a man. No, he's an SJW writer. He's mentally ill, and all those chicks who were writing for Marvel, it's like, well, they helped destroy comics are doing better than ever. No, they're not. Yeah, I mean, if you believe that, it's like great. Stay in your world where the color of the sky is always going to be like cotton candy. But most other people don't believe that. And if that's the case, great. That just means we're on different pages with people. Like there's a lot of developmentally disabled people out there who like mainstream comics. Oh, so Myers was criticizing the writing, but because he was coming from a female, it's like Marvel and DC were using women as shields. Women who couldn't write, like they couldn't write to save their life, write their way out of a paper bag. SJW just propaganda, and because of that, he thought he felt comfortable labeling all the comicsgate as misogynist, and so he repeated that several times. And somewhere within these paragraphs, you'd say, okay, well, you've introduced that term. Now you have to kind of go to the points that meet the elements of your claim. Like, oh, on this occasion, Myers reviewed this comic and he said some horrible thing. It's like, well, we've all listened to Myers. He's got 100,000 people who listen to him. We haven't heard him say any of that. We're the people who actually listen. And that's the thing about the anti-Comicsgate people, is that they don't listen to Comicsgate and they don't read the comics that, people in Comicsgate make. So the criticism feels like it's on kind of shaky foundation. You go, oh, did you even listen to that show? He goes, no, why would I listen to Comicsgate? Then why are you criticizing it? Because someone told me. But does it seem likely that perhaps they didn't listen to the whole thing, or they're listening to clips out of context? It's like, that's why a lot of this anti-Comicsgate stuff feels kind of disingenuous, because they're not listening, but they feel comfortable criticizing it as if they are. Like, I don't even think they're hate listening anymore. Maybe in the early days they were, but I kind of don't think that so much anymore. Anyway, so he's the guy who spurred out about Comicsgate. This is years ago. And a lot of the people in the mainstream kind of spurred out about Comicsgate. And now, because Comicsgate, like what was Comicsgate doing? They were laughing at these SJWs who were coming along, and it was, it's transformative versus curative people's approach to art. And this is transformative, where you're just turning it into something completely different. And that's what mainstream comics was going through too, a transformative period where people who were dealing with it, writing for it, editing for it, were not familiar with the products, and they wanted to take it in a completely different way. It's like they're just using it for propaganda purposes. If a Spider-Man is set in stone, there's a certain limits that the character has been created. You can't go outside that. The character is already created. If you want to create something new, go ahead. Same with Lord of the Rings. Same with all these other properties. They're already well fleshed out. You can make them go in different directions, but you can't violate the character. Otherwise, nobody's going to buy it. Like, you can't force people to watch these shows or buy these comics. So that's what Comicsgate was talking about. They were laughing at how SJWs were obviously just using things for propaganda purposes. They were just grinding an axe. So that was years ago when Sienkiewicz said that, criticized Comicsgate for daring to criticize these people. Now, suddenly, I don't know, he's probably in his 60s, so he's a little bit different generation, older generation, where to a lot of people, Lord of the Rings, left or right, is an example. It's almost a little bit sacred. It's an example of very good fiction. It's probably some of the best fantasy adventure. I mean, yeah, definitely, it's the best fantasy adventure ever written. At least those 4 books, The Hobbit and the 3 Lord of the Rings, or just top of the food chain, because they were fantastic, but unlike earlier books, they weren't too fantastic. They were mostly just action adventure type of books. So now he's on the left, but you've got these people who are further to the left. They're globalists who believe in transforming things for propaganda purposes. Like, it bears no relationship to the original storyline. You've swapped out characters, or you've created characters that didn't exist, but instead of making your own property like ElfQuest, which they go into later, you're taking something that already exists and you're violating the rules of the universe. It's an English story. It's a European story. It's not set in Africa. You'd have to write something new, and you couldn't call it Lord of the Rings. So he's probably in his 60s, and he's looking at this, and it's like, oh, well, hold on a minute, left-wingers. You guys are going too far. You're changing something. It's unrecognizable. It's like, yeah, that's where they breathed energy, oxygen into this engine of propaganda, globalist propaganda since World War II. And it's like, yeah, they're going to come for everything. They're going to destroy everything. It's nothing more than propaganda to them. This bears no relationship to Lord of the Rings whatsoever. Same with the comics. The comics, when you're like comics, you know, it's a basic. They go out on an adventure, and remember that Spider-Man issue where the girl's outside and says, "You hit the jackpot." It's like that's what people want to see. They want to see the guy and the girl go off and then have little spider kids together, that kind of thing. You know, they fight the dragon and rescue the princess. That's what people want to see. They don't want to see. They don't want to see gay characters because 99% of us we're not gay. It just doesn't click with us, and we can't just like put it aside to get into the story. It just doesn't work that way. You don't want to see. You want to see the straight hetero characters go off and go, what about all the gay kids? Well, one, there's not that many. Two, you're going to have to create something new for them. And three, most people are not very comfortable with sexualizing kids. And I know they have this argument of like, well, the hetero stuff is sexualizing. No, because that's just kind of normal. It's like, that's the societal expectation because that's the biological reality. That's the normal. The abnormal is something that deviates from that. A lot of hot words there. Abnormal, deviance. Maybe, I almost said Stanley was onto something, but it wasn't him. Kirby was onto something with his deviance. You know, it's funny that I went back and I read that comic, and you look at these the characters, and it's like the blonde hair, blue eyed character, and on the left was the deviant. It's interesting. The writer's kind of psychology comes out a little bit. My point is that he's going through the same, I don't know, the culture war has come to his doorstep, and he's seen these characters that are unrecognizable. Comicsgate went through that 5 years ago. And so now he's starting to complain. He goes, yeah, this isn't Lord of the Rings. It's like, obviously he's not I'm sure he's a far left whack job, but he's of a different age where he's not so far left that he's going to lie and say that this is Lord of the Rings and this is a good thing. There is a far left people who will do that, but he's, you know, to his credit, he's not one of them. But he's also the same guy who 3 years ago or 2 years ago was coming down on Comicsgate because Myers was criticizing SJW woke comics, and so now Sienkiewicz finds himself in the same position of criticizing Lord of the Rings because it got too woke. It's like, oh well, it's a line in the sand. This is too woke, but comic books are you know, they're like, that's okay to make gay Spider-Man and like Hulk is a Korean guy and Thor is a woman with cancer. It's like, well, where's the line in the sand? It's this transformative versus curative. Why not just maintain the artistic vision of the source? Because evil can't create. These are parasites. They're vermin, parasite, globalists. They can't create anything. Now, to their credit, they do mention ElfQuest, which actually spent an hour today going through and reading ElfQuest, because this is the example of, you know, don't, instead of destroying Lord of the Rings, create your own thing. And so she and her husband created this thing back in the 80s, I think, and it's theirs. They own it, and it's okay. It's for kids, little kids kind of thing. It's okay. It's something little kids would be into. And then as kids get older, the older kids are trying to tell them, like, no, this is little kid stuff. The real stuff is the Lord of the Rings story, because it's based in something that matters. It's based in the English story, the European mythology. It's propaganda, and I'm not sure if I want to say it's harmless propaganda, but there's really no such thing. But it's like, it's fluff. There's just nothing to it. It's just her back in the 80s. It's like she would have been woke for the 80s. She was trying to be, I don't know, some left winger back then, and she had these two tribes that were mixing, and it was like it was cringy back then. It's cringy now, but like, it won't stand the test of time because it doesn't pass. It doesn't have any verisimilitude. It's based on these different tribes coming together, and it's just a little bit of woke, like 60s hippy dippy propaganda. It's nonsense, and we all know it's nonsense. That's why it's not going to last. Where Lord of the Rings is different because it's based in a different core. It's basically a core of realism, of, you know, your blood tribalism, of of European mythology, and it's kind of the same thing of nationalism versus globalism. That's why these globalist stories, they come across as propaganda because they are propaganda, and stories that are based on even fantastic elements of mythology feel more accurate because they were written from a tribal perspective, not from a globalist propaganda perspective. I mean, even if it's the point of saying, well, nationalist propaganda writes better than globalist propaganda. Yeah, it does, because it feels more true to life. It's like you're fighting for something. You're fighting for the king and your tribesmen. When they do this kind of mixed thing, it's like, oh, well, what are you? You're nothing. You're fighting for what exactly? And it's kind of tricky to talk about on YouTube. But I think most people know where I'm going with that. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next episode.